Today we have the first lesson in the second term, and this lesson called friction. Repeat after me. Friction. So what's meant by friction? The friction force, it is the force between two objects that touch each other and move in opposite direction. Not in the same direction, not in a parallel direction. It moves in opposite direction. Like this. We have here friction. This man makes something called the friction force. So the friction force is the force between two objects, the two hands, that touch each other, as we see, touch each other, and move in what? Move in opposite direction. So there are types of friction, such as friction between solid objects, like this, solid and solid object. Here, friction between solid object and air, the airplane make friction between the solid, the airplane is solid, and the air. Type number 3, friction between solid object and water. Solid object like this tree and the water. So what is the factors that affecting the friction force? So what is the characteristics or the properties that I made it the friction force increase, or I don't made it the friction force decrease? Number 1, type of the surface material. The type of the surface material, if it's rough surface, rough like this photo, the friction force will increase, will take more effort, so the friction force increases. While, the surface material is smooth, like this picture, smooth, not rough, the friction force decrease. The opposite of increase, decrease. So, number 2, or the factor number 2, the speed of the body. If the speed of the body moves slow or by low speed, the friction force decrease. So this car moves slow, so the friction force decrease. While when this car moves so fast, the friction force increase. So the factor number 3, the surface area of the moving object. If the surface area of the moving object is large, the friction force will increase, while when the surface area is small, the friction force decrease. So, friction force between solid object and air. The friction force between the solid object and air, like trains or rockets and new cars, are designed in something called streamline shape. What's meant by streamline shape? Streamline shape means this shape called streamline shape, something narrow, very narrow. Why the trains or rockets and new cars designed in a streamline shape? Due to decrease the surface area, so air resistance decrease, or to increase the speed and decrease the air resistance. بالعربي كده الفريكشن فورس معناها الاحتكاك. كل ما الحاجة تكون streamline shape، يعني ايه streamline shape؟ streamline shape معناها ان هي مدببة او من قدام رفيعة خالص. بتعمل ايه؟ decrease the surface area، يعني ما بتاخدش space كبيرة، فبالتالي resistance decrease، air resistance decrease، مقاومة الهواء، انه الحاجة تقاوم الهواء بتقل، فبالتالي increase speed بتتحرك أسرع. Like birds or bats stretch their wings on landing. ليه الطيور عموما stretch their wings يعني بيفردوا جناحاتهم قوي ويشدوها علشان يعملوا landing، يعني يهبطوا أو ينزلوا على الأرض. due to decrease the speed and increase the air resistance. يعني ايه؟ يقللوا سرعتهم فبالتالي increase ال air resistance، يزودوا المقاومة بتاعة الهواء فينزلوا بالراحة. So what is the friction between the object and water like this shape? Also, most of the shapes is designed as a streamline shape. Why? To increase the speed علشان تمشي أسرع and decrease the water resistance، تقلل مقاومة المياه ليها. Also, the dolphins have a streamline shape to increase their speed and decrease the water resistance. And goodbye, but let's make a quick revision. Friction force between two objects that touch each other and move in what? Excellent, in opposite direction. Why? There are three types of friction force. Friction between solid object and solid object, solid and air, solid and water. If the friction on the rough surface, the friction force increase, while on a smooth decrease. And if the friction force on something slow or low speed, what will happen to the friction? Decrease. While when the car moves fast, the friction force increase. After that, if we have large surface area, the friction force increase, and vice versa. If it's a small surface area, what will happen? Excellent, the friction force decrease. Rockets and planes and birds have a streamline shape to increase the speed and decrease the air resistance. And if it's something move in water, so to decrease the water resistance. Goodbye.